I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of the CorbettReport.com, and he's also an editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He's speaking to us from Japan. Welcome back to the show, James.
Thank you for having me back on.
Japan has just put out another, mini budget trying to stimulate the economy. What are the details?
So on Tuesday here in Japan, the Japanese parliament just passed an extra spending package, which they are prone to do these days. And this is 3.3 trillion yen in extra additional spending, which is about 32 billion US dollars. So this is going to bring the total of the budget for the fiscal year, which ends in March of next year, to 100 trillion yen, which is up already 2% from last year. And this is not really surprising for a country that already has a 250% debt to GDP ratio, by double the highest in the developed world. And no signs of the brakes being put on that anytime soon, as the Japanese government is desperately trying to spend itself into inflation to get the Japanese economy going again. And we've seen what this policy has done over the last 25 years, let alone over the last few years of Prime Minister Abe and his government attempting, by hook or by crook, doing anything they can to try to get inflation going with the full support of the Bank of Japan, which you'll recall in its last monetary policy meeting decided that they were going to target a 0% rate on the 10-year Japanese government bonds. What that means, in effect, although the Bank of Japan doesn't buy it directly from the government, they buy it through the secondary markets, but the effect is the same as outright monetization of the debt. And what that is really, when you break it down, is a blank check for the Japanese government to issue as much 10-year bonds as they want, without ever having to worry about interest on it. They have a blank check to print as much basically free debt as they want, and so far there's no sign that they're going to do that with the 10-year bonds, but that's certainly another trick that they'll have up their sleeve. All of this, of course, is really trying to, push on a string, because the real point of all of this is to try to spur actual growth and productivity in the economy itself, and there isn't a lot of sign of that. There was a slight increase in industrial activity in Japan in August, but that was offset by falling consumer prices and falling household spending, which of course is also attendant upon the stagnating wages here. So there really has been no growth to speak of in the Japanese economy, certainly over the period of the Abe administration, let alone the past 25 years. No sign of that changing. And add to that, of course, the icing on top of the birthday cake, as it were. Japan now has 65,000 100-year-olds in the country, which is a remarkable figure, and by far the highest percentage of the population on the planet Earth with 100-year-olds in terms of the overall population. So I guess that's a good sign for the fact that the Japanese people are generally healthy and long-lived, but it is not such a good sign for the economy, because that is just a reflection of the overall demographic crunch, where you now have 25%, I believe, of the population over the age of 65, with as much as 40% of the population over the age of 65 by the year 2060. No sign of any change in that trend in the demographics because of the falling fertility rate, all of which means Japan is up doo-doo creek without a paddle, and there's I don't think this additional 3.3 trillion yen in spending is going to do very much, if anything at all. Any
thought to giving people baby bonuses?
That already exists to a certain extent. That's dealt with, I think, through the prefectural government. So I don't believe there's a federal program for that, but prefectural governments have their own baby bonus type systems. Also, this particular spending package, this additional 3.3 trillion yen, does include handouts to some low-income families. So there is that type of direct stimulus going on, but the majority of it tends to be basically kickbacks to connected construction companies and things of that sort. And there is, of course, some money in this new stimulus package for the creation of the maglev train lines, because that is, of course, going to be the long-term future of Japan.
Why do you need maglev trains when you already have bullet trains that do 300K?
It's a good question. I guess faster is better. One could imagine that would be a good thing in a overall productive and healthy economy. It does seem like just make work type of fiddling around in an economy that is stagnating and floundering. But it is certainly a big pot in which the government can throw its money, and it's not exactly wasted. People can make use of that faster travel to get from Tokyo to Japan in 1 hour instead of 3 hours. So it will prove useful to some people, but I think at this point it really is just something that the government can throw its money at that will be spent into the economy somehow or other.
Isn't Japan famous for building tunnels and bridges to nowhere where they have super high tolls so no one uses them?
Absolutely true. In fact, the country is in every way you could think of. They've done every type of make work project you can imagine. There is not a creek or a stream or a river or anything here that doesn't have a built-up bank that isn't natural. It's all, concrete and everything. I mean, they've done everything that they can in terms of construction, mindless, meaningless construction projects. And no sign of that changing. But the problem is when your economy is already used to that level of activity, it just requires that all the time. So it's difficult to even find ways to waste more money into the economy.
What's the morale of the people when they look around?
Not that bright. I would say that the overall disposition of the Japanese people is that this is just the way it is now, the belt tightening. And I was reading an interesting statistic that I hadn't realized before, that I think might explain that mindset to a certain extent, is that when the bubble popped here in the real estate markets in 1990, the personal wealth that was lost in that bubble popping was actually 3 to 4 times the amount of wealth that was lost in the Great Depression. I mean, obviously it's a different experience because the bubble was created on top of what was already a fairly productive economy, and it wasn't that the economy fell down to, people on the street or anything of that sort, but the amount of wealth lost was extremely large. It was just notional bubble wealth, but it was wealth that people were counting on at that time. And I think the effect of that has been to absolutely sear into the consciousness of certainly anyone over the age of 30 or 40 here in the country that the good times came to an end a long time ago, and now you have to hold on to what you have. So a country that was already very much inclined to engage in saving and being frugal and not spending is even more tight and with their money. And I think there's no sign that they're going to be releasing their death grip on their yen anytime soon. And that's reflected in household spending that just refuses to climb, and CPI core inflation rates that just refuse to climb along with it.
Should that be a caution to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who is going to implement on the 17th of October a law that will require people to face a mortgage stress test that doesn't test their ability to see if they can pay a 2.5% mortgage, but a 4.5% mortgage? A real estate expert has told me that's going to suck about $200,000 out of the value of every Canadian home, or $1 trillion out of the economy overnight. Could that happen?
It certainly could happen, and a lot of people have been saying for a very long time that the Canadian housing markets generally are a bubble that is waiting for the excuse to pop. The Canadian housing market did not suffer not even the popping in the United States. It wasn't even a pop, but it was at least a slowdown on the craziness that was happening there. The Canadian markets continued in its pace, so it is due for some sort of event to to at least slow down the craziness. And something like that certainly could have that kind of effect. And of course, the real question is, if you pop it too quickly, then there's going to be a lot of pain involved. And that's something that really has to be thought about carefully, because again, the Japanese situation is perhaps the most obvious example of what can happen when you lose a real estate bubble very quickly.
Well, there was no consultation about this. It came as a complete shock that this would happen. And of course, people in the real estate industry are loudly complaining about it. But again, Ottawa just says, well, you're the ones who are going to lose the high commissions when the price of homes collapse.
Yes, and that kind of cavalier attitude towards the situation is worrying, because again, I mean, certainly the markets as they exist now are not ideal, and one does imagine that there does need to be more caution placed on lending that type of money out. But again, it's the question of the way that you put the brakes on the situation, and if you just slam on the brakes when you're going 100 miles an hour, you're going to end up in probably a very bad car wreck. So I think there needs to be a little bit more finesse and a lot more consultation with the industry itself to find an effective way to put the brakes on.
Well, the Trudeau government has also shown they don't care about consultation. They also imposed a very significant carbon tax without talking to the provinces about it. They were supposed to be holding a meeting about the issue, and instead of holding a meeting, they just imposed the rules, and 4 environmental ministers from across the country walked out because they felt that they were being forced to do something they didn't want to do.
Did we say meeting? We meant press conference to announce our decision. Yeah. This is the way this government is going to roll, apparently. And again, it should be, I mean, this should be worrying to a lot of people. Even people who are supportive of the policy would have to, I think, be very concerned about the way the policies are being introduced and enacted. Because again, without proper implementation, even a policy that is for the good, even if these were for the good, it would still, the implementation could undermine the any good effects that it could bring about.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
Gem International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the 4th largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. Gem International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. Samsung, one of the largest electronic companies in the world, of course, is recalling its Note 7 phone because it bursts into flames on a regular basis, it appears. I've heard the hit to Samsung could be as high as $17 billion. Can they survive?
It's a good question, because it is not just about the Note 7, although this is the most obvious and famous and spectacular recall affecting 2.5 million devices. But Samsung has had its recalls in the past, not just in the United States, but also in Australia, involving microwave ovens, involving washing machines. So this is not an isolated incident, and it's the pattern not only of the defects themselves and the recalls, but also the way that Samsung handles these, to the point where you have people who have dealt with Samsung in the past saying that they are not surprised about the bungled handling of this recall. So it is certainly a black eye for the company overall, and the question is not just the immediate financial hit that they'll take from this, but also going forward, the market share that they might end up losing as a result of the black eye that their reputation is getting right now.
How important is that reputation?
It's extremely important in, especially I think in high-grade electronics, because there is a lot of brand loyalty when it comes to these things. People get used to having a certain system, and it generally takes people a significant event, a significant shock, or something very new to come along to convince them away from something that they're familiar with and comfortable with. So if this does motivate Samsung users to switch over to Apple or whatever else, that could be a very significant event because it's hard to win those types of customers back once they've left the reservation, as it were.
When you said questions about the way Samsung dealt with recalls in the past, were they slow to issue them? Were they slow to honor them?
Yes, in both cases. And there have been, the people who have been involved in those recalls said that there have often been hoops, as they say. There are a lot of hoops to get through to get replacement products or to get refunds. They've just made it very difficult for people to basically redeem on what the company's offered. So we'll see what takes place with Note 7 and ultimately how this is handled. But the fact that they're just stopping production altogether, this is a pretty major event for a company that depends to a large extent on its smartphone sales.
And this is happening going into Christmas, and Christmas is celebrated in Asia now too, isn't it?
To some extent, anyway. Yes, I mean it certainly has become a commercial holiday anyway, and it is a retail season here as well, so it will certainly have an effect.
I've heard too with this recall, they're now Samsung is sending customers a fireproof container so they can mail their phone back in case it bursts into flames. And Note 7s are banned from aircraft. And millions of people a day, of course, travel by air. So if you're carrying one of those, how do you, they'll take it off you. How do you call your relatives and tell them I'm back at the airport? Because payphones have virtually disappeared.
It's very true. And it's something that I was thinking about recently. We haven't had a landline in years now. And in the event of some sort of cataclysmic smartphone outage or what have you, there would be a significant problem for a lot of people these days, I think.
The Hillary-Trump saga. If you wrote this as a book, James, no publisher would touch it. But it's reality. How are people in Japan viewing this?
Somewhat bemused, I would say. I think a lot of the same types of stories that are filtering around in the mainstream media in Canada, in the U.S., are the types of stories that people are reading here. But I don't think that to whatever extent it's puzzling to people in Canada or in the United States, it's even more puzzling to people over here. It really does seem like some kind of soap opera or something. So I think people are just watching this somewhat bemused at this point. And again, I don't think necessarily people have strong opinions either way per se. It's just that Donald Trump has obviously made comments that would be reflective of changes in a relationship between the United States and Japan, which is probably what most people here are concerned about.
Would the Japanese public be exposed to newscasts where there's Trump on videotape saying he would grab women by the crotch? That's his dating technique. He admits that he would go into the dressing rooms to look at the naked Miss America contestants. And now there's a tape where he said he actually went into the dressing rooms of the Miss Teenage America contestants. How would that be reacted to in Japan if somebody said that?
Well, there certainly is a culture of, it is a sort of boys club culture in Japanese politics, so I guess there are analogs to that here, and you've had, for example, female members of parliament being told that they should go home and have babies and things of that sort. So there is certainly some misogyny that goes on here. Perhaps it's in such a different cultural context that I'm not sure it's directly relatable, but certainly those stories do get over here. And in fact, I'm looking at Tokyo Keizai online right now, an outlet that it's just a translation of a Reuters article talking about the Trump saga and some of the things that are going on. And the subheadline is basically talking about how women are pulling out the red card on the campaign, as it were, pulling their support from Trump because they can't countenance it anymore. So those types of stories definitely do get play over here.
Turkey and Russia seem to be cozying up, which seems strange considering Turkey shot down a Russian aircraft. But now they're now in the oil business together?
The gas pipeline business, anyway. This is the Turkish Stream that was it was floated as a replacement for the South Stream project, which was Russia's idea to run a pipeline under the Black Sea that would come out through Bulgaria, Hungary, up into Eastern and Southern Europe. That was the plan, but the European Council back in 2014 put the brakes on that plan after the Ukraine destabilization and the demonization of Russia and all of the turmoil and the sanctions. The European Council suddenly decided that that pipeline project didn't meet their standards. So Russia said, all right, we'll withdraw that, and here's our new plan. We're going to run that pipe under the Black Sea, and it's going to come out through Turkey. And the idea here is that Turkey would become sort of an energy hub, not only for Russian gas, but also they've just inked a 10-year deal with Algeria, I believe. They have some other pipeline deals and things in the works. So they want to become a gas transport hub, and they would take the gas and send it up into Europe. Europe needs gas. They require somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 billion cubic meters a year, and they produce somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 billion. So they've got a significant shortfall. And at the moment, the majority of that shortfall is already met by Russia. But those are pipelines that are going through Ukraine and other areas that are obviously problematic. So they do need this pipeline, but it's the question of the politics behind it. So it's a very twisty, turny tale with a lot of different subplots. But one of them, as you say, is Turkey and Russia cozying up does seem strange, not only because of the shoot-down incident itself, but just generally the fact that Turkey and Russia are on opposite sides of the conflict in Syria. And that is ramping up right now, not quieting down with what's going on in Aleppo and the United Nations Security Council wrangling to try to get some sort of resolution. It's a very strange tale, but pipelines do make strange bedfellows, and it is, if nothing else, economically advantageous to both parties.
Dollar signs tend to change relationships, I think. Ask Donald Trump.
Exactly right. And I think that's the lens that we have to be looking at this through. Turkey, of course, not only wants the money, but they also want the power, the geopolitical and regional power that comes with being an energy transport hub. That would obviously give them an advantage over regional rivals like Azerbaijan and others. So I think they are trying to position themselves to be an extremely important link in the chain for European energy.
I know Russia has been branded as an unreliable supplier because twice they've cut off the natural gas to Ukraine in the middle of winter. So why wouldn't they do it to somebody else they didn't like?
It's exactly right. I mean, I think it's a calculated risk that you'd have to take, and apparently Erdogan is willing to take that risk. And also, I mean, from the European perspective, there is the possibility that they would look at gas coming through Turkey as potentially tainted, as it were, by the Russian sourcing. So I don't know if that's necessarily going to play into Erdogan's plans the way he thinks it is, but it will be interesting to see how it plays out, if nothing else. But if people follow pipelines and their proposals and construction, things change all the time, and then projects get shelved, and then they get revived, and there's rival projects, and all sorts of things can happen. So until it's actually hardwired into place, all bets are off the table.
The French Prime Minister has suggested the European Union should instead form what he says it's not the United States of Europe, but then his definition, we'll have our own army, we'll have our own border controls, we'll have our own united tax code. Sounds pretty much like the USE.
Yes, and that is, I mean, I think we see France and Germany as the real drivers behind the idea of essentially a United States of Europe in all but name. And there are a lot of forces pulling at the seams against that idea. Obviously, the most obvious example was Brexit and the fact that the British were not going to have any part of that. But you're also seeing a lot of peripheral states, as it were, that are very much opposed to this. And some examples of that would include Bulgaria and Hungary and those other states that would have benefited from that South Stream pipeline, but the European Council came in and stopped that because of the political wrangling, and Bulgaria and Hungary and those types of states are very angry about that and other interference as they see it from the European Council. You have the southern states that are unhappy with the way that they're being treated, like Greece is being treated like a pariah state and things of that sort, and the debt negotiations that go on, and Italy could be next, and Portugal, and places like that. So there's some unhappiness there. It really is, it seems in some ways like France and Germany versus the rest of Europe, and they're trying desperately to consolidate power as everyone else is pulling apart of that power.
James, anything else you wanted to tell us about from Japan?
There's always a lot going on. I think this is going to be a very interesting time, not just because of the election shenanigans, but perhaps even more importantly, whoever gets into office, I think they're going to have some monumental things to overcome in terms of the American economy and what's going on with the Fed. I'm expecting those types of moves to come after the election, so I'm thinking that it will be probably in the winter time that we're going to be starting to see some of the real potentially long-term moves, including a potential Fed rate hike, which would have ramifications around the world. So if you think that the last few months have been crazy, I think you haven't seen anything yet.
James, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me on.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of the CorbettReport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He was speaking to us from Japan. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.